What is up guys, Blue Spooky here. Just wanted to remind you guys at the start of this video to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you end up enjoying it. If you guys are liking these daily uploads, be sure to do this, as it really helps the videos to do well and ensure I can continue making them daily for a long time to come. We always like to aim for around 1,000 likes on these videos. If we can get there, that will really help me out. If you guys have any thoughts about the stories in the video, please be sure to leave them in the comments below, as my favorite part about making these videos is reading your guys' thoughts on the stories they're in. Without further ado, I will let you guys enjoy the next hour or so of true scary stories, and I'll see you guys again at the end of the video. Have a great day. This story takes place years ago, when I was still in high school. It happened after lunch period. The way my school worked is that we would have class, then lunch, then study hall. Class was an hour long. Lunch and study hall were about 25 minutes each. Your study hall classroom would be the same classroom you had directly before lunch. For me, I had gym class that period. It was 10th grade PE. The class was very easy and enjoyable for me. When we would have study hall though, we would have to use a different teacher's classroom who had prep hour at that time. A couple of times we were unable to get inside though, and had to spend study hall in the gym instead. It was kind of weird if that happened. We would sit in the bleachers or on the gym floor and just do our homework. Usually, the teacher would let us know before we went to lunch where it would be, and most of the time, we had a certain classroom. On this school day after lunch, I started heading back. It was a decent ways away from the lunchroom, all the way on the other side of the school. I talked with some friends for a while. My gym teacher was not very strict at all, especially with study hall. He didn't mind students coming back a minute or two late. Eventually, the lunchroom cleared out, and I began walking back to class. The bell rang when I was still a minute away. By then, the hallways were empty beside me walking them. Soon, I arrived at the classroom, but the door was closed and locked, which was odd. When I tried opening it, I couldn't get it to budge at all. I also noticed inside the window that the lights all appeared to be off. I turned and walked away, realizing we must be meeting in the gym today. I hadn't been informed though. I remember thinking to myself, I don't remember being told we were meeting in the gym, so how did everyone else know besides me? I headed back toward that area when suddenly an announcement came over the school speakers. It said, "This is a lockdown. This is not a drill. Please remain in your classrooms. No students are to be out in the halls." I was about halfway back to the gym area at that point. It still hadn't registered to me that the classroom had been locked down. I hurried up and made my way to the gym. When I got there, obviously the doors were closed and locked. It was at that moment that I realized they were meeting in the classroom. I know I was a little slow on that, but I tried to head back now, walking as fast as I could without running. I hadn't heard or seen anybody else in the hallways. Everything was completely silent until suddenly I heard the sound of something hitting a locker around the corner. It was like somebody threw something up against it. The sound was very loud, enough to break the deadly silence around me. I stopped in my tracks. I no longer knew what to do. I started moving in the other direction, and in that moment, I heard footsteps approaching from where I'd heard the loud noise. My heart started racing. I kept walking and heard the footsteps continuing. They were about to come around the corner now. I saw a staircase on the left and darted over. I went down the stairs. I ran about 30 feet down the hallway at the end to the first classroom I saw. When I arrived, I desperately started banging on the door. I didn't know what class this was, but I was hoping they would let me in. After knocking a couple of times, I tried the door, but of course it was locked as well, and the teacher would not answer. As I waited, I heard whoever had been behind me now walking down the stairs rather quickly. I looked back and saw a pair of legs appearing. I couldn't tell who it was yet. I didn't want to know. I turned back and kept pounding on the door. Then I heard the person behind me reach the bottom of the stairs and begin walking toward me. All of a sudden, the classroom door flew open and the teacher yanked me in, then slammed the door shut behind me. Once I was in the classroom, all of the lights were off. I saw the students were all in the back of the room, laying on the floor. The teacher locked the door again. Immediately, someone tried to open it from the other side. It must have been whoever had been following me. They slammed on the door a couple of times. The teacher looked out the little window, then turned back and walked away. Some students started talking quietly, one of them even asking me where I'd come from. The teacher stopped everyone and told us all to be quiet. I remember things got really silent for a while. She went back over to the door and looked out again. I think by then the guy was gone. We remained locked down though for what felt like a really long time. I think it was more than an hour. Finally, the lockdown was lifted. I remember I got called to the principal's office and had to answer some questions. They didn't really tell me much about the situation though. That was definitely the scariest moment of my life in high school. I don't know what would have happened had that person caught up with me. I don't want to know either. I've had some pretty creepy experiences throughout my life. A lot of them live with me and re-emerge when the lights are out. By that, I mean I'm essentially haunted by their memory. One in particular really stands out for me. I remember being home alone one night when I suddenly began hearing a woman's voice that I couldn't really make out well. Whoever this was appeared to be mumbling and sobbing. Obviously, that was really scary. I remember I just ran out of the house that time. On another occasion, I was home alone when the door to the living room slowly creaked open by itself. Instantly, I got to my feet and went to see who was there. Of course, no one was. I don't know if I'm susceptible to the paranormal in particular or anything, but I would be lying if I said I wasn't at least a little bit of a believer. Talking about the paranormal is not why I'm here today, though. I want to share with you the scariest experience I ever had, which happened when I moved into an apartment to live alone for the first time in my life. This happened 3 years ago now. I had just moved in. Picture a room with only the bare bones furniture and lots of cardboard boxes scattered about. I remember being way too tired to unpack any of those boxes. I thought I would just unpack the following morning after. I positioned my armchair at a perfect angle for the TV I'd set up and collapsed into it. I relaxed so much that I must have started dozing off while I was sat down. I think I slept for a good while when I was awoken by a strange noise. I heard laughter coming from the opposite side of the living room wall. Well, as far as I'm aware, that was where it was coming from. I only heard it once though, so I kind of chalked it up to me being half asleep. I didn't really make a big deal out of it. I got up and went to bed. In the morning, I was making myself some breakfast when I heard another strange noise coming from the wall opposite my new living room. It was an ominous laughter once again. A weird thought came to my mind. I wonder if the person next door is laughing at me. I need to give you a little more context here. I think when you think of a laugh, you think of those sitcom laughs, where a live audience is doing some canned laughter when something is funny. The laugh I heard was not like that though. It was like someone laughing in a deliberately manic manner. I don't know, like the Joker or something. It really creeped me out. I hadn't introduced myself to my neighbors yet, and as it's a custom here in Japan when someone moves in, I figured now might be a good time to do so. I mean, at least I knew the guy next door was home, right? I was sure it was a guy based on his laugh. I went outside and pushed the doorbell for the next door. I waited for a couple of moments, but no one came. Just as I was about to give up and go back inside, one of the other neighbors came out of their apartment. He looked like he was getting ready to head off to work. "Hey, what are you doing? No one has lived there for a long time," he said to me. Well, as you can imagine, that was pretty strange to hear, since I just heard someone laughing next door. I introduced myself to the man and kept the laughter I'd heard to myself. I ended up thinking that perhaps it was just another somewhat creepy encounter with the paranormal. Great. Trust me to live next door to a haunted apartment, I thought to myself. Normally, I would have freaked out and wanted to get out of there straight away, but since I had some previous history, I thought I would stick it out. Nothing else really happened, besides hearing this strange and ominous laughter every now and then. It happened multiple times over the course of the following days, but who cares about a little laughter anyways? At least that's what I tried to tell myself. 3 months went by pretty quickly, and despite hearing the man laughing every now and then next door, it was pretty much smooth sailing. After that 3-month period, though, I started to hear a new noise coming from next door. There was a new strange clanking sound coming from the walls. Yet again, it was the living room wall. The laughter was one thing, but now the strange clanking and banging sound was a little too much. I thought about moving, but if I'm completely honest, I was too lazy to pack everything up and get searching for a new place. I didn't act. I just stalled and learned to live with this new eerie noise. Life got in the way, and I was out more than I was in anyway. One day, I think it was a Saturday or a Sunday, I know it was a weekend, I was getting really annoyed by those weird noises from next door. They were always so loud and unnerving. I decided to kick the wall. I remember thinking to myself in the moment, if there really is a ghost next door, why would they care if I kicked the wall? Nonetheless, I did it. I wasn't ready for the reaction I got, though. There was a very distinct and clear male voice, which shouted out. Then I heard the sound of something crashing. What the hell is going on, I thought. I froze. I didn't expect to provoke a reaction from the spirit next door. Reality hit me like a truck, though. There wasn't a ghost next door at all. There was a person in there who must have been living in there without the landlord knowing. Well, I wasn't going to go and ring the doorbell again, but I knew someone who might. The police. I called the cops, and they arrived quite quickly. I heard them try the door and enter. There was a bit of a commotion next door and a heated exchange. There were screams and shouts and sounds of fighting. Turns out there really was someone living next door after all. I found out later a middle-aged man had been living in there, even though the apartment was supposed to be empty. The man was apparently under the influence of some illicit substances, shall we say. When the police busted in, he went on a deranged rampage, went around kicking, screaming, trying to bite. Turned out he was the landlord's son. The landlord allowed him to use that apartment to get up to whatever he got up to in there. I was really annoyed he was allowed to come and go as he pleased, while I had to pay to listen to him laugh like that. The laugh itself really creeped me out. But that didn't hold a candle on what I realized the clanking sound was. Apparently, it was the sound of him digging a kitchen knife into the drywall that separated our apartments. I was told there were tons of holes in his side of the wall, and it seemed like he was trying to dig his way into my living room. I moved after that. I got my deposit back and was forgiven a couple of weeks of rent payment. That goes without saying, in my opinion. Although I've had run-ins with the paranormal, the fear I get when I remember the sound of that man trying to stab his way through my wall is unmatched. I dread to think what his plan was if he actually got through. I first met her when I was on the way home from work. I remember that night so clearly. I was crossing the road from the bus stop opposite my building. There was a small park across the road by the bus stop that I had to walk through to get home. I was living alone at the time this happened. All of a sudden, I remember hearing a voice call out to me from behind the phone booth in the park. "There's a full-length mirror in your house, right?" Well, my heart started beating out of my chest. I'm a bit of a jumpy person already, and that question was disturbing. "Am I wrong?" someone asked. I quickly turned around to face the direction of whoever was calling out to me. To my surprise, there was a woman craning her head around from behind the back of the phone booth. She was dressed in all dark colors, either beige or black. I can't really remember. She was stood there kind of hunched over. I hadn't ever seen this woman before. I would say she was in her 40s at a guess. To me, she was a total stranger. Without skipping a beat, the woman went on with her line of questioning. "There's a full-length mirror in your home, right? It's about this big, isn't it?" She began to mime a rectangle shape with her fingers. "You should get rid of that mirror. Throw it away. Bad things can happen." Is it a memory? Can't help it if it's a memory. I realized the woman was crazy. I stood my ground and thought I would come back to her with a firm tone and tell her there's nothing like that and not to worry. "I'd better get going now," I said. As I left, I started to quickly walk back to my apartment. I could hear a footfall coming from behind me. It was as if that woman didn't hear a word I said. She just kept prattling on to me. I know, I live next door." "Hey, just throw it away. Is it a memory? It would be a shame if it was a memento, but that really can't be helped. You should throw it away tomorrow." At this point, I figured the best thing I could do would be to just ignore her. I could see this conversation was going nowhere. I thought she would get tired eventually and just leave me alone. However, that plan didn't exactly work out. She followed me into my building. We had a communal area which wasn't behind a security door, so anyone could walk in. That's exactly what she did. She followed me inside and waited with me while I called the elevator. I mean, there's a chance she really could have been my neighbor, I thought. I didn't really run into my neighbors all that much. She kept going on in these nonsensical circles. Eventually, I couldn't stand listening to her anymore. I said, "That's enough. I don't have whatever you're talking about." I raised my voice, getting really annoyed. "Don't lie to me. I saw it. It's about this big, isn't it?" She began to mime her rectangle shape again with her fingers. She followed me into the elevator at the last second. Had I known she was going to join me, there was no chance I would have taken it at all. I would have just taken the stairs. I wanted nothing but to be away from this rambling maniac. She kept saying the same phrases over and over and miming that mirror shape with her hands. It was like she was inciting a spell or something. The elevator took us to the 7th floor, and as soon as the doors opened, I ran to my apartment, 708. I scrambled to unlock the door, expecting the crazy woman to chase after me. She didn't, though. She just stood by the elevator and continued to shout at me to throw away the mirror. I calmed down a little after I was behind a locked door. That woman really shook me up. I found myself trying to dissect the meaning of her strange words as I laid awake in bed that night. I couldn't make heads or tails of it. It made no sense. I didn't have anything like that. Not that it really mattered. I was a 25-year-old woman living all alone when this happened. If some of you are reading this thinking you wouldn't have been shaken up by this, try to empathize with me and realize this woman was a complete stranger who ambushed me in the park at night. Come the next morning, I couldn't get her words out of my head. I guess that was due to the rough night of sleep I had. I went to work feeling so tired and groggy. My coworkers teased me all day, asking if I had a hangover. When the day was done and I was approaching my building, I cringed at the sight of that creepy middle-aged woman, once again wearing all beige or black, and waiting for me. I knew what was coming before she opened her mouth, a repeat of yesterday's ramblings. I decided to ignore her again. I mean, what else could I do in the situation? I got in the elevator and so did she. It's not like I could stop her because she said she also lived there. This time though, when I got out of the elevator on my floor, she followed me right up to my door. I did not like that one bit. I spun around to give her a piece of my mind. "Listen, lady, if you keep this up, I'm going to call the police, okay?" In a flash, as if she hadn't heard anything, she continued with her ramblings. "I live next door. Let me in. I'll show you. I'll help you throw it away. Can't be helped if it's just a memory." I was sleep-deprived and severely irritated. This crazy neighbor had just gotten on my last remaining nerve, so I let her have it. "What the hell are you talking about? What's in my apartment? It has nothing to do with you." I screamed at her and didn't care who heard me. The strange woman then said in an exceptionally calm manner, "Just throw it away. The mirror. It doesn't just reflect light, does it? It reflects bad energy. An evil spirit is passing through your home into mine. It's reflected by your mirror, and it comes into my home." I'd had enough. I asked her with a smile on my face, "Are you actually crazy?" She began rambling again. I gave up. What was the point in wasting my time speaking to this maniac? I opened my door, really forcefully entered, and slammed it shut. I locked it. There was no point in interacting with that woman any further. While I was inside, I could hear the woman on the other side of my door, still rambling about the full-length mirror. I turned on the lights in my apartment and went to contact the landlord. I said I'd been having a bit of trouble with my neighbor and wanted it resolved immediately. I was in a bit of a panic. I guess I was all worked up with the adrenaline pumping. If that crazy lady kept pushing me, I didn't want to be responsible for whatever happened next. The landlord listened to me, but didn't seem as interested as I would have expected him to be. Suddenly, my doorbell started ringing like crazy. I told the landlord to listen and said that was the crazy lady who lived next door, and he needed to do something about her right now. The landlord then replied with a lazy, "Uh-huh." I could barely hear him over the doorbell. I thought I could hear a man's voice outside my apartment too for a moment. "Hey, listen, if you're talking about the apartment next door, no one lives there. We used to have a guy who lived there, yeah, but he died in the end. Now some cell phone company rents it. Use it for storage, I think. Trust me, nobody's in there now, so I don't know, call the police or something. That ain't my tenant." I hung up and felt completely shocked and alone. The woman outside kept talking about the mirror, asking if it was a memory or not. I didn't know what to do. As far as I knew, there was nothing resembling the description of what she was describing in my apartment. I ended up calling the police once I put myself together. I'm not sure if they caught the woman or not because technically I don't think a crime was really committed, according to them at least. I mean, I felt as if her ambushing me constantly was, but apparently that wasn't the case. I did the best thing I could do for my mental health and moved at the first chance I got. The next place I moved into wasn't half as nice, but at least I never encountered a fake neighbor as strange as that lady. I really wanted to make sense of the words she was saying to me. I remember them verbatim. What it means, though, I have no clue. I wonder if she's been bothering the next tenant as well. On a side note, I guess ever since I had that unpleasant encounter, I don't like full-length mirrors that are as big as the one she described, and I don't wish to own one either. Back in high school, my junior year, I used to get to school about 15 minutes before it started. That's what time the bus would drop us off, and after getting inside, I would head upstairs to my locker. There was this spot upstairs near the stairwell that had a large window at the end of the hall. It wasn't that far away from my locker either. You could just sit on the ledge in front of the window. My friends and I would sit around there just about every day, and talk for quite a while. It was kind of a routine, or a before-school hangout spot for us. It overlooked part of the parking lot, and also the softball field next to the school. We could see the sun rising, and it lit up the inside really well. One day, I arrived at school and went upstairs to my locker. I went over to my friends by the window. There were about 5 of us or so. We chatted until the warning bell sounded. When it did, we started to disperse to our classes. The hallways had been really crowded, but things were quickly becoming more quiet. I looked out the window and saw a few kids hurrying in at the last minute to make it to class. It was at this point, though, that I noticed something quite strange. I saw this one guy hurrying into the school, only he was much too old to be a student, and he didn't look like a teacher either. I thought that perhaps he was a substitute at first, but he was not dressed for the part at all. He just wore an old baggy-looking sweatshirt and sweatpants. He entered the school on the floor below. I headed to my class and walked through the hallways, down toward the other end. My classroom wasn't really that far away. It was also on the 2nd floor. As I got there, I noticed down at the end of the hallway was the same man I'd seen entering the school. He was now coming up to the top of the stairs. I went into my classroom at that point. Class went on as usual, as did my next few classes after that. Then came lunch period. I remembered that as I was sitting with a couple of my friends at the table, I saw the man again. He walked into the lunchroom, then out another way. I was surprised to see him so often. I thought it was so weird that I even noticed in the first place. The school I went to was pretty large, with a lot of students and faculty. It would have been easy to blend in with the crowd. Later in the day, in my last hour, we were in class. About halfway through, the phone in the classroom rang. Our teacher picked it up at the desk. Afterward, he told us the school was being locked down. We had to get up and move to the back end of the classroom. He locked the doors and turned out the lights to the classroom. We were all really confused. I didn't even connect it to the guy I'd kept seeing around school since earlier. I was just as clueless as everyone else. All of us in class were talking to each other, wondering what was going on. Nobody knew, though. The teacher wouldn't tell us either. He just said for us to keep calm and stay quiet. About an hour went by, and finally the lockdown was lifted. We still didn't know what was going on, though. School was dismissed, and we were all rushed home. I rode the bus, and when I got home, my mom was there. She asked me about the lockdown. I guess she had heard more about it than I did. I found out that a man, the same one who I'd seen multiple times during the school day, was the cause of it all. During the last class period of the day, he was seen suspiciously walking down the hallway following a student. The school was then locked down. The police were called, but unfortunately the man was able to escape to an open window. Nobody knew who he was. I told my mom I had seen the guy enter the school, and had seen him again later multiple times. It blew my mind the guy was able to fly under the radar for so long. He had been there since the start of the day, but it wasn't until the last hour that anybody seemingly noticed him. I'm just glad the guy didn't cause any harm. I don't know who he was or what he was doing, but judging by how often I saw him, I wonder if the student he was stalking was me. One night, not too long ago, I was reminded of one of the scariest things that's ever happened to me. I thought I would share it here as well. So, here goes. I was shopping at my local supermarket, and I was walking across the parking lot back to my car. I was carrying all my shopping bags on me, when all of a sudden, I felt my arm being tugged from behind. I was yanked around, and I expected to see someone I knew. Instead, I came face to face with a complete stranger. At first glance, he looked to be a completely normal-looking guy, who was in his mid to late 20s. I naturally assumed he must have mistaken me for someone else. That's when he said to me, "Hey, that's the wrong car. Mine's over here, come on." I thought, what the hell are you doing? Was this some kind of prank or something? I said nothing. I just stood there kind of shocked as he started tugging on my arm harder and harder. He began to yank me in the direction of his car. "Hey, what are you doing?" I snapped at him. "You got the wrong person, buddy," I said. I tried to shake free of his grip. He looked me dead in the eyes. "There's no mistake here. Come on, we're going home." When he looked me in the eyes like that, I could immediately sense I was dealing with an extremely dangerous person. I felt a shiver run up my spine. I began to panic as he tried to pull me harder and harder. I tried to scream out, but because I was so overwhelmed with fear and shock, I could barely make a sound. As I was being dragged away, all I could think about was how it would be all over for me if he managed to get me into his car. I was prepared to put up a fight, but I could already tell this man was much too strong for me. I'm not exactly unfit, but I am a woman, so I had an unfortunate disadvantage in this struggle. Fortunately for me, though, I didn't have to plan too long for how I would fight him off. At that exact moment, an elderly man who had parked nearby my car was returning to his vehicle. He noticed right away that what was happening here was not normal. He called out to me and asked if I was okay. That gave me the ability to scream for help, and the man called for security. He tried his best to rush over and help as well. I guessed he was in his 70s by the look of him. I didn't want him to get hurt if this guy who had me by the arm lashed out at his involvement, so I told him to stay out of it. The security guard came rushing over, and this dude was big. He grabbed the young guy who had a hold of me and made him let go. I was asked by a store worker if I was okay, and if I would give a statement to the store so they could ban him or pass it on to the police. This all happened so quickly. The young guy who'd grabbed me was taken to a room at the back of the store and held to be interrogated when the police arrived. Apparently, the young guy said this was all a misunderstanding. He said I was his fiancé and a bit of an overreactor. There was no problem at all. He was pleading with the security guard on the night shift to let him go and go back to his fiancée. He was telling the security guard how worried I would be about him being detained back there. He was so convincing that the security guard actually came out from the back and asked me if any of this was true. I told him the truth. I had never met this weirdo before in my life. I was asked if I was sure we weren't just in the middle of some kind of argument. That really made my blood boil. Once I heard the guy talking, though, I understood how convincing he sounded. I showed the security guard my ring and photos of my real husband and children. The security guard went back in. The next time he came out, he told me something very disturbing. Apparently, the weirdo was shaken by the photos I had shown and decided to confess his wrongdoings out of nowhere. The man who grabbed me knew I was married. He knew I had children as well. He saw that I'd been regularly going to the supermarket on the weekends by myself, and he thought that meant I had a falling out with my husband. He thought he could swoop in, take me away, and marry me, then lock me up in his house. I know that sounds strange, but stay with me until the end. He was taken away by the police. After a while, his parents arrived from their countryside home to apologize to me. I guess this might sound very confusing to you, but it's a very Japanese thing to do. We do stuff like this. After meeting with his parents at the police station, I explained the situation to them and told them about what had happened. They asked if I would allow their son to make an apology to me. I was fine with it. Honestly, I kind of wanted more answers. I explained to their son very concisely how happy I was with my husband. Even though he worked long hours, I knew he was doing it all for our family. Once I'd told him that, it was so strange. It was like he had been exorcised. He turned completely sane and rational, as if he had been under some kind of possession or something. It was the strangest thing I'd ever seen. He started speaking completely normally and even politely. "Oh my gosh, I'm really sorry. I don't know why I did that to you. I'm so sorry for making you feel scared." Even though I'm a bit naive, I decided to give him the benefit of the doubt. I didn't know if he was being sincere or not, but I did end up receiving some compensation from his family. Actually, his parents were really nice, and I decided to keep in touch with them. They weren't to blame for their son's frightening choices that night. They told me they had been worried about him for quite a while now. They had noticed some odd changes in his behavior that they deemed quite strange. They decided to take him for a checkup at the doctors, who in turn referred him to the hospital. It turned out after an x-ray, they discovered he had a brain tumor that had been pressing on a part of his brain and making him act strangely. A while after that encounter with the man in the supermarket car park, I happened to run into one of his acquaintances. I took the opportunity to ask and find out how the man was doing. Apparently, he had surgery that completely removed the tumor and was right back to being a completely normal guy who never did anything like that again. He did scare me, and it was quite frightening, but I can't say I hate the man. He was clearly not in control of what was going on in his own body or his own mind. All I can say is that it was a real eye-opener. The incident taught me just how drastically something going wrong in your brain can completely change a person's personality and even what reality looks like, and turn them into something they aren't at all. I love movies and watch them all the time. Many times I go to movies in theaters. In fact, I go so much that I often go by myself. When friends can go with me, obviously I go with them, but I see movies in theaters at least 2 times a week. I would say that I really enjoy going alone. Usually I like to sit by myself in one of the far back rows. The story I am about to tell you happened not that long ago. I went to my local movie theater to see the Ant-Man movie. When I got inside the theater, it was sort of busy, but not too bad. The room Ant-Man was showing in was not super crowded. I sat in the right, last row from the back. In fact, after sitting down, I only noticed a few other people inside near me. I watched the previews, and then the movie started. About an hour into the film, though, I started to get this really strange feeling. It kind of felt like I was being watched or something. It was very weird. I was unaware of anybody else sitting in the back row, the only row that was behind me. The other people scattered throughout the theater were all in front of me, and certainly not looking in my direction. I looked around behind me to reassure myself that nobody was there. When I did, though, I realized that I was wrong. There was, in fact, a person there, and it was a man who I hadn't noticed before. He was directly behind me. He was not even in the theater seat. He was kneeling on the ground in front of his seat, looking right at me. I was very confused. I didn't know why he'd be doing this in the aisle and looking at me instead of the movie. My first reaction was to look away back to the screen. I figured the man would realize that whatever he was doing was weird and that I'd seen him. Surely he would stop then. I looked back, and the man was still there, though. I asked him what the heck he was doing. The guy just looked away and ignored me. I shook my head and looked back to the screen. I could tell the guy was still right behind me, though. I got so unnerved that I got up and moved to the far other end of the aisle. I sat down there. I didn't really care exactly where I sat. I just wanted to be left alone and not have this guy breathing on my neck. I looked over to the guy a couple of times. He was now just sitting on the floor, watching the movie. I couldn't even begin to guess what his deal was. Another 10 minutes went by when I heard a shuffling of movement behind me. I looked over, and the man was in a seat that was much closer to me. He was in the last row behind me, and 3 seats down. I rolled my eyes. 5 minutes later, I felt him directly behind me again, as he did before. At that point, I turned around and stood up. I asked this guy what the hell he was doing. The guy moved back and sat down in his seat. He said he was just trying to watch the movie. I was so annoyed that I got up and left. I walked directly out of the theater, even though the movie wasn't over yet. The guy had ruined the experience for me. Sure, I could have stayed and argued with him, or I could have complained to an employee, but I didn't feel like doing those things. It wasn't that big a deal to me, because I knew I would be in the theater again soon. I went to so many movies, and that was the first time I ever really had a bad experience. I figured it was just a freak thing, and wouldn't ever happen again. The next couple of times I went to a movie there, it went quite well. I didn't see that guy. I saw a few different films and really enjoyed them. I was back in the theater again about 2 weeks after the initial incident. I was expecting it to be another very typical and good night out at the movies. I was by myself, seeing a movie called Operation Fortune. There were kind of a lot of people in this movie. There were kind of a lot of people at this movie. Once again, I sat in the back this time. I was sitting in the very last row of seats though. Some other people were in that row, but on the other side. I remember that as the movie ended, I saw some of the other people start to stand up and leave. I was about to do so as well, when I saw the man who had been behind me before. He was standing right by the exit. I was not going to leave until he did. I didn't want to run into him again. I stayed where I was and waited for him to leave. A bunch of other people left. A few minutes went by, and most everyone was gone from the theater. The guy remained there, though, standing by the exit. I realized that he must have known I was there, and he was waiting for me specifically. At first, it seemed like a crazy thought, but as more time went by and the man continued to stand there, it seemed more and more like a possibility. I hadn't noticed him before, though, and didn't know how he would even know I was in here. Soon, it was just he and I in the theater. I got up and started to walk over. Then I stopped, though. I had a really bad feeling about this. I thought better of it. After a few seconds, the guy started walking up the stairs in the aisle, getting closer to me. I started moving away to the other end. The man made it up to the back row where I was. I jumped over some seats and ran to the other aisle of stairs. I ran down them as fast as I could. I could see the man now charging after me. When I got down, I ran to the exit and out the door. When I was back in the hallway, I ran for the nearest exit and left the theater. By the time I made it outside, the man no longer appeared to be following me. I'm not exactly sure at what point he stopped, but I still went home quickly. Since that experience, I haven't been back there. It's been months, and I'm thinking about going back to that theater. I've been to a couple of others, but they're farther away. I'm not sure who the guy is or if he had seen me at the theater before, and that's why he was messing with me. Hopefully, I just never see him again. This happened about 5 years ago in Kyoto, the former capital of Japan. I had an office job, and sometimes the hours weren't as flexible as I'd like them to be. Us workers would usually have to stay until the projects we owned were completed. I didn't mind doing it, I suppose. It was just hard to have any constants in my life because I didn't have a very steady routine. I decided to do something about this. I made a commitment to myself. I would take a walk every day after work around this forested trail area close by my neighborhood. No matter what time I finished that day, I was going to stick to it. Now, because on average I finished up pretty late, and this forest trail was out in the sticks kind of, I didn't usually run into any people along my route. That all changed one night, though, when I ended up encountering someone standing by the side of the forest trail. He was a man of medium build. He wore dark clothes, and the striking thing about this guy was the way he just stood there. In a word, he was motionless. It was almost as if he were a statue and not a man at all. I could feel there was something off about this guy from the very moment I saw him. Something about him was giving me the creeps, and I didn't like the idea of having to pass him by in the middle of that forest in the dark. I didn't want to go anywhere near him. If I turned back and went the way I came, though, it would add another 30 minutes onto my walk, and I certainly didn't want to do that. I remember having to physically try to stop my hands from shaking. I was all tensed up. I felt for sure he was about to do something to me as I passed him by, but fortunately he didn't. It was as if he didn't even realize I was there. I hadn't been out on my routine walks due to the terrible weather we'd been having in the area in the following days. Of course, I also didn't do my routine walk on the weekend either, so I kind of forgot about that incident altogether. Once I got back on the trail again, at the beginning of the next week, to my shock, I ended up meeting the same man, stood by the side of the trail in the same area, 4 days after our first encounter. He was in the exact same spot I'd seen him in before. It was an unusually clear night. The moon was full, and it illuminated the forest trails well. Thanks to the moon being so bright that night, I was able to see that strange guy before I got anywhere near him. I was able to turn back and keep my footsteps quiet. I really did not want to be anywhere near this guy. Once again, he was completely motionless and had a vacant look upon his face. Why was he even out there? Because of him, I quit my nightly routine that I had. I just didn't feel like walking anymore. 2 weeks went by, and I was reading the newspaper in the office break room. It was there that I got the shock of my life. There was an article that said a body had been found in that very same forest trail. The police believed it had been a murder. I remember that strange man. I thought to myself, there's no way he could be behind it. I did think it could be possible, but overall it was more unlikely than likely, right? I was so curious I couldn't get it off my mind. I decided to head back to the trail. I found the area the police had cordoned off. There was police tape and a detour set up. The place was covered by white tarp and was blocked off from the public. I could only see it from far away, but it was the very same place I'd seen that man standing by the side of the trail. When I saw that, I got shivers. I turned back and went home. It might not be related at all, but another strange thing that happened is I ended up with insomnia and couldn't sleep for a while without taking sleeping pills. I think I must have had a close call on the day I passed that man by. He may have been the culprit of the murder. I also wonder sometimes, though, if maybe when I passed him by, I'd actually passed by the victim, or was it neither? I don't think I'll ever find out. Back when I was a kid, I used to go to the library all the time. This was in the early 2000s, when smartphones weren't really around much. I got a lot of entertainment by looking at books back then. I was probably around 6 or 7 years old at the time this occurred. I was decent at reading, but I much preferred to just look at pictures. When we went to the library, it would usually be my mom, my sister, and I. We would go down to the public library that was only about a mile away from our house. We'd go each week and check out a new book and some VHS tapes, then bring them back home. I would be really excited to go. It was one of the main forms of entertainment for me. One time, I went on a weekday afternoon with my mom and sister as usual. I went to my usual spot of the children's section. There were quite a few bookshelves in the children's area, and there was also some tables and chairs and stuff. It was somewhat separated from the rest of the library. My sister is a few years older than me, and sometimes she would go to the other parts of the library to get some books with my mom. I would go off on my own and find the books that I wanted to get. My mom would find me when it was time to go, or let me know that she was going to another part of the library. This time, after arriving, I went to one of the aisles with a lot of picture books. The library was relatively quiet from what I can remember. I know that I sat down on the floor in one of the aisles, in between the bookshelves, and started looking at books. There were some interesting ones with a lot of pictures in them. I got carried away and some time went by. I'm not sure exactly how long, but maybe an hour or so. I remember that suddenly out of nowhere, a man entered the aisle with me. I moved to the side to get out of the way, but remained seated on the floor, reading my book. The man walked over to me though, and then stopped in front of me. I looked up at him, wondering what exactly he wanted. He asked me what my name was, and I told him. He then told me that my mom was looking for me. I believed him, and put the book that I was reading back on the shelf. I stood up, and the man told me that my mom had asked him to help look for me. I wasn't sure if this guy worked at the library or not. The librarians typically just wore normal clothes. I didn't recognize this man, though. It was possible that he did, but it was also possible that he did not. He told me to follow him, so I did. We walked out of the aisle, and then around the corner. There we were in a more open area. I followed him through that area, and he was walking kind of fast. Out of the corner of my eye, I actually saw my mom. She was over to my right, kind of far away. The man was not walking in her direction at all. He was also going toward the front of the library. I stopped and started going over to my mom. I thought that maybe the man had mistaken me for another kid, or possibly he thought my mom was someone else. Either way, I knew where my mom was now. I started walking to her. At first, the guy turned around, and I saw him start to approach me again. All of a sudden, he stopped and turned back to where he was going. He kept going on his way. I made it back over to my mom, who was in the corner of the children's section with my sister. I looked back over, and the man had now disappeared. I think he left the entire library. I really didn't think that much of the experience for the rest of the time I was there. I stuck with my mom and sister, and nothing else happened. Years later, looking back though, I think he would have actually left the library with me. I'm really glad I located my mom when I did. I went out on a trip to the mountains with my wife, and we saw something that I'll never forget. I don't think my wife will ever forget it either. It took place in Okama. We were on a trip in the middle of nowhere pretty much. I was driving, and it gets darker quicker than you realize out in the sticks. It was in the middle of the night. I had left later than I wanted to. There was a whole thing I don't want to get into going on at the time. We were driving on the winding roads, and unfortunately, we got a little bit lost. I'm not exactly a country kid, so I don't really know all the ins and outs of the back roads. I guess that's why we ended up a little off course. I followed the maps as best I could, but stuff happens. I thought we were on track, but it turns out we were not at all. Unbeknownst to me, we were heading further and further into the mountainous woods. I had no clue how to find my way home, or even to our destination. I remember that at some point, we arrived upon a school which seemed to have become disused. I guess disused is a word I picked up from my wife. To me, it looked completely abandoned. There was a rusted sign, and it read something something elementary school. Just beyond that sign was a chain-link fence. What was beyond that was completely unknown to me. We had no choice. We had to go back the way we came. Now, this is where things get pretty weird, and frankly, somewhat unbelievable, unless you're me and my wife, I guess. Let me explain. I pulled away from that abandoned school in the mountains, I guess it could have been a forestry school or something to do with the scout group. I don't know. Anyway, I began to pull away from that place. I did my 3-point turn in my car, and we went back the way we came. After about 5 or 6 minutes of driving down that road, I found myself approaching the same school gates I had seen just a while ago. It was a real head-scratcher. I mean, I thought I was going the right way. I had no clue how I wound up back where I was earlier, driving away from. It didn't make any sense to me. No matter how many 3-point turns I did in my car, or which trail I turned down, no matter how many times I pulled away from those rusted school gates, I somehow found myself in front of them again. I have to say, it was really freaking me out. We were at a complete loss of what to do. It got to the point where me and my wife both stopped blaming the sat-nav at all. We had to admit to ourselves that something very unusual was going on. I mean, surely human error can only account for so much, right? Even with an extremely error-prone human like myself, we just couldn't seem to get off this trail. It seemed impossible. It got to the point where it got so late and I got so tired that the best option seemed to be for us to pull over and sleep in the car that night. Neither of us wanted to do that. This story would be 10 times longer if I sat here and wrote down all my lady's complaints about the night. Anyway, eventually we made an agreement to head down the mountain pass as soon as day broke. In the light of day, surely we would not make the same mistakes we had been making before. Lucky for me, I had packed a couple of beers for the trip. Lord have mercy, I really needed a couple to take the edge off. I popped a few tall boys and let loose for a while, playing some music we both liked. After a while, I guess no more than 5 songs or so, I ended up blurry-eyed and sleepy. Driving really takes it out of you, man. I remember being suddenly woken up during the night to my partner screaming. It cut through me like a knife through butter. Really scared the hell out of me to hear her screaming like that. When my eyes opened, it was already bright outside. I got the shock of my life when I saw loads of little handprints on my driver's side window. They were on the windshield and even the passenger side window as well. It looked like people had been approaching the car while we slept. I was so freaked out. I have to admit it, with everything that happened the night before, my wife was freaking out too. I was trying my best to calm her down, but I just couldn't do so. She said she had a bad feeling about the whole area. I couldn't really do much to remedy that. I was trying my best to bring some sanity and stability to the situation. She took a long time to come around. I thought the best thing to do to stop the mayhem would be to pop out of the car and wipe the windows down. No hints, no freakouts, I thought. I grabbed the chamois leather in my driver's side door and hopped out of the car. I started buffing the outside windows and windshield, but the handprints weren't going anywhere. I tried harder and even got some spray out of the boot of the car, but the smudges of the little hands weren't moving. I then heard my partner say something that lives with me to this day. The handprints are on the inside. I sensed the terror in her voice. I felt a shudder go through me. I scrambled back in the car and wiped everywhere on the inside. As the handprints went away, I floored it out of there. Hands down, the scariest night of my life. We went straight home and didn't even bother finishing. What is up, guys? Blue Spooky here. Thank you guys so much for watching, especially if you made it this far to the end of the video. If you liked the video, please be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe if you feel so inclined. If you have any feedback for me as well, be sure to leave that in comments below the video. If you guys have a story you'd like to send in, or if you'd like to contact me for any reasons, there will be links to my social media in the description below the video, including my Facebook, Gmail, and Twitter accounts. Go ahead and send me a message on any of those, and I'll try to get to you as soon as possible. If you do decide to send in a story, Please be sure to include in the tagline what the name of the story is if it has one, what type of story it is if it has one, and how you'd like to be credited in the description below the video. Please make sure to include as much detail as you feel comfortable with and try to use as much proper grammar as possible to make sure you have the highest chance of appearing in a future video. Overall, I think that's pretty much it for now, guys, so thank you so much for watching, and I hope you guys have a great day.